Okay, let's get started. I see that people are still joining on Zoom and on Facebook Live, but I want to make sure we have as much time as we can with our guests. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Naomi Reinhartz. I am the Chief Executive Officer of the American Society of University of Haifa, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. We are really delighted to have an amazing guest with us today for the third in our series of Israel and World Jewry in a Time of Crisis, Unpacking the Rise of Anti-Semitism in the United States. This is the third and final installment of our webinar series with the acclaimed national law firm, Saul Ewing. And this webinar is once again being co-sponsored by Rabbi Arthur Weiner and the JCC of Paramus, Congregation Beth Tikva in New Jersey. As the National Director of the Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL, from 1987 to 2015, today's illustrious guest, a lawyer and activist, Abe Foxman, he's seen it all when it comes to Jew hatred. Even still, nothing could have quite prepared him for the torrent of anti-Semitism facing world Jewry in the aftermath of the October 7 terrorist attacks in Israel. Abe, who currently serves as ADL's Emeritus Director, is a world-renowned leader in the fight against anti-Semitism. He's an expert in what motivates this hatred and how such bigotry and discrimination have manifested and evolved over the years. Today's webinar brings you a timely discussion with Abe as he shares his perspective on the current rise of anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world, how social media has helped to fan the flames of this escalating plight, and what the Jewish community should be doing to fight back, and not only in a reactive, but in a proactive sense. Also joining us as the moderator of today's program is Jeff Robbins, a board member of ASUH and a partner at Saul Ewing, and we're thrilled to have him back again too. Before I hand you over to Jeff, I want to take this opportunity to welcome back supporters of ASUH and University of Haifa. With the university opening its doors and resuming studies over 3 months ago on December 31st, following a delayed start to the academic year due to the ongoing war with Hamas in Gaza, it has served as a catalyst for healing between Israel's different ethnic communities. As Israel's most diverse campus, with 40% of the student body consisting of Muslims, Christians, Druze, and Bedouins, for 50 years, the University of Haifa has played a role and will continue to play a role in ensuring that all sectors of the Israeli population unite to nurture their beautifully diverse civic society. And this role has proven more important than ever today, with the university establishing a paradigm for healing throughout Israeli society. To support us and the University of Haifa in this mission, please visit us at asuh.org/donate. And together we can ensure that University of Haifa and the north of Israel continue to heal Israeli society from its darkest hour. It's hard to believe, but just days ago, we marked 6 months since the horrors of the October 7th terrorist attack. 6 months on, more than 100 Israelis are still in captivity in Gaza. And 6 months on, we as Israelis and Jews around the world continue to struggle to recover our sense of normalcy, if we can call it that, in the aftermath of that fateful day and the ensuing war with Hamas. In those 6 months at the University of Haifa, we've had 1,500 students and 50 faculty members serving in the reserves, including 300 students in the security forces. Our university has ensured that it provides support to these brave student soldiers who have been serving and defending our country, be it through financial assistance, through psychological aid, through relief to displaced families, and more. Recently, we announced that we have streamlined admissions and extra financial aid for IDF reserve soldiers, for security personnel, and for civilians who are directly affected by the Israel-Hamas war. This special admissions route is a unique, first-of-its-kind track for students who are starting the next academic year. We will fast-track acceptance to certain programs and also include a scholarship of $2,000 for every qualified student. Again, to support our student soldiers, you can visit us online and donate. Without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Abe Foxman and Jeff Robbins to all of our listeners and viewers today. As always, again, please share your name and your location and your connection to University of Haifa in the chat on Zoom and on Facebook Live. You can share your questions in the Q&A section on Zoom, and we will save time at the end of this webinar to address as many questions as we have time for. So thank you again for your attention, and I'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Naomi. And Abe, it's nothing more than reciting the obvious to say that there's no one in America whose name over the last half century is more clearly synonymous with the fight against anti-Semitism and with the collaboration between American Jews and other communities on civil rights matters than yours. Some of the approximately 10,000 people who will watch this today or in the next couple of days will be old enough to remember the famous E.F. Hutton commercial, the investment advisor commercial, where the tagline is, "When E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen." And so in that regard, I want to ask you a couple of questions at the beginning about some news that you have made over the last couple of days. First, in an interview that you gave with The Forward, and then subsequently in social media, when you said that in effect there was a real danger that pro-Israel votes, including American Jewish votes, were being taken for granted or might be taken for granted, and that there was a real danger that American Jews would have their own walking feet and sit on their hands. And as an old, warm and close friend of Joe Biden, that was a concern of yours. You posted two messages which have gotten a lot of traction over the last several days. The first one, "I like President Biden and I respect him, but who advised him to threaten Israel to agree to a ceasefire deal for hostages immediately knowing that Hamas had rejected every offer Israel made? Why should they make a deal when America, quote, supports their, quote, position?" And then finally, last night, quote, "President Biden, respectfully, please stop criticizing Prime Minister Netanyahu. While he's not perfect, Hamas went to war against the state of Israel, not the prime minister. Your ceaseless criticism only weakens Israel and strengthens Hamas and Israel's enemies here and abroad." So tell us, if you wouldn't mind, what led you to the step of giving the interview and posting those messages, which I'm sure were the product of a lot of thought on your part.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff, I'm worried. I've been fortunate for 50 years to live through all kinds of crises between the United States and Israel, from the Reagan plan to reassessment to Pollard to the AWACS to all kinds of crises. But always there was this understanding how important the relationship is, how dependent each country is on the other, Israel more on the United States. And all these crises, as serious as they were overcome. But the difference with today's crisis in between our countries is it was never at a war. We're at war now. Israel is war. Israel is fighting what it calls its second war of independence. So misunderstandings now, or differences of opinion now, are very, very important and very troubling. And the first time in my life I ever endorsed a candidate was to endorse Joe Biden for the presidency when he ran. I respect him, I admire him, I value him. What he did in the beginning of October was unique, was unique in history. He went to Israel, he stood with Israel, he embraced Israel, he called for military support, financial support, and it was a historic moment in relationship between Israel and the United States, and I would say even the Jewish people. And then several weeks into the war, things began to change. And day by day, what I was witnessing was a distancing of Israel, of the United States from Israel. So as great as it was in the beginning, as unique as it was, all of a sudden, every single day, something was happening which showed a distancing. What I perceive happened is, I don't think Joe Biden changed his mind. I think what happened is the political season came upon us. And the gurus, the political managers, I think are miscalculated and are miscalculating, which is why it led me to speak out. I believe that they said to Joe Biden, listen, you need the votes in Michigan of the Arabs. You don't have to worry about the Jewish vote. 75% of the American Jews are liberal Democrats. They're not going to vote for Donald Trump. So you don't have to worry. They will be there for you when you need. And I think it's a terrible, terrible miscalculation. It's taking the Jewish community for granted. I think they're wrong. I think if you worry about Arab feet marching away from the election, I think you need to worry about Jewish feet walking away from. We do have an option, and the option is not to vote. We also have selectivity. We will vote more. First of all, we vote. Second of all, we financially support. And we will be very, very selective in the Congress people that we support or do not support. So I felt it important to speak out and say, you know what? You're entitled to do what you, but remember, you're doing it at a cost. Don't take us for granted. We still embrace what you have done. We still value what you've done, but every single day you're distancing to the point where you are encouraging Israel's enemies from Hamas to, there's always been in Congress a group of senators and congressmen who never liked Israel. But all of a sudden, they've been empowered. They have a certain chutzpah. And what we've been seeing is every time that the president criticizes Israel, their voice is raised in terms of putting conditions on aid to Israel. I think this is a dangerous moment as the war is still on. Israel is still fighting for its freedom, for its future, and so is the Western world. And therefore, I hope that somebody in Washington is listening, not only to the political science and political managers of the election, but well, and I would just add, in a moment too, I think Senator Schumer's speech was outrageous, outrageous. For the number one elected Jewish official in this country to call for an election in a democratic ally country to threaten the state of Israel, then the vice president threatening, and that vote in the UN was for what? For what? So that Hamas and the enemies of Israel would thank America and embrace it. And then my mother used to say, if somebody spits in your face, don't tell them it's raining. So, to vote in the UN against Israel, which is embraced by all the enemies of Israel, and then to tell us there's no change in policy, there's no change in policy when every single day the president finds language to criticize and not embrace. So I think the time has come to say, you know what, we're listening, and there will be consequences.
Let me ask you a variant of that question. This morning, the Jewish Insider has a piece entitled "Attention Shift: Is Biden Losing His Voice Against Anti-Semitism?" And the thesis is that, to your point, over the last several months, as these over-the-top accusations against Israel have mounted abroad and on campuses and in the Democratic Party and elsewhere, the president has been noticeably less public, so goes the thesis, in his denunciation of anti-Semitism. A, do you agree with that? And B, if you do agree, what effect on anti-Semitism can silence or a voice have on the acceptance of that kind of stuff in America?
Well, first of all, President Biden said that silence is not acceptable when it comes to anti-Semitism. And his administration acted in a historic way for the first time in the history of the United States, or I'd say in any country. The United States government developed a plan, an initiative, a program, which said to the American people, and certainly to the American Jewish community, anti-Semitism is our responsibility, not only your responsibility. And they came up with an initiative. And there were meetings, and there were forums, and there were pronouncements, etc. So from this high note of support in the fight against anti-Semitism, there seems to be all of a sudden a silence. I'm not ready to say that it's a distancing, but again, I think some of us were waiting to hear in the State of the Union the president to take credit for his initiative on anti-Semitism. It wasn't there. We don't hear it. There are no more conferences. It's all about Gaza and the other side of Gaza, not about Hamas. It's about what Israel is doing. I'm not ready to come to that conclusion at this moment. I think Yom HaShoah is coming. I think there will be opportunities for the president and the administration to raise its voice against anti-Semitism. They have a political issue. They're trying to dance on both sides, and you can't. At the end of the day, if you try to dance on both sides of this conflict, you're going to lose both sides, because the issue of anti-Semitism today is basically anti-Zionism. The anti-Zionism calls are against Jews, against synagogues. I live in a community in Teaneck where there have been demonstrations on behalf of the Palestinians in front of synagogues. Not the Israeli consulate, but in front of Jews going to prayer. So there is this issue that anti-Semitism today is anti-Zionism and anti-Israel. And I guess maybe the administration is uncomfortable. But Jeff, let me also take the moment. I'm not sure you're going to ask me. Let's not leave the Republicans off the hook. So, because there too, there's a serious. I think that past President Trump needs a tutorial, and maybe Jared Kushner or Jason Greenblatt or David Friedman, his advisors on the Middle East and Israel, maybe they need to explain to him what really is happening, because his rhetoric in the last couple of days has not, he talks, stop the war. Stop the war is another word for ceasefire. To say he's the greatest friend of Israel that we've ever had, and yet he's talking about ceasefire in another language. Also, he's border on anti-Semitism, talking about loyalty of American Jews all the time. And then also, I would say to my Republican friends, we don't need your resolutions. They're empty words of support of Israel. There's one thing you can do. President Biden asked for $14 billion of military and economic aid. The ones that are holding up are the Republicans, who are tying it and conditioning it to the border, to abortion, whatever it is they want. They can just open it up and it can happen tomorrow. So don't profess to me how much you love Israel, and yet the one thing that Israel needs at this moment, you are the ones who are stopping it from happening.
Well, let me ask you the last political question. As somebody who has spent a lot of time in Washington, a lot of time with people on the Hill in very complicated and nuanced circumstances. Congressman Richie Torres, yesterday, I think it was, criticized some of his fellow Democrats, referring to, quote, the hyperbolic and hysterical dehumanization from Fairweather friends, quote, which, quote, has given Hamas enhanced leverage. It sounds as though you are concerned that, however you characterize it, Hamas and others of Israel's enemies have been given enhanced leverage, inadvertently or otherwise, by some of the denunciations that have come out of what Richie Torres calls Fairweather friends. What's your reaction to that?
No question. But again, Washington is playing a political agenda. I guess Israel is playing a political agenda too. You can blame some of the issues of Bibi Netanyahu's decisions on his political agenda. So in both countries, we're witnessing a political agenda. On the other hand, it could undermine the existence of Israel, because now we've got Iran again up front in the issue. If Iran sees a weakening of American support for Israel, but I'm also, much more concerned at the moment here domestically. There has always been the Squad Plus, but certainly after October 7th, they were silent, they were quiet. All of a sudden, the crescendo of their voice of Senator Warren and Senator Sanders, all of a sudden, again, I said, there's a new chutzpah in terms of trying to condition aid to Israel, conditioning aid in a time of war. So every time the president criticizes, he gives them wind, he gives them fuel, he gives them chutzpah, he gives them strength, and it is growing. I saw an item today, 25% of Congress are on the issue of maybe conditioning aid to Israel. That's horrific. That's horrific. Under a president who has been so positive, so embracing, so strong in support of Israel. Arabs are listening and watching every word, but so are the enemies of Israel here in the United States. Ironic and interesting and beautiful, there are two members of Congress, Senator from Pennsylvania, Fetterman, and Richie Torres, who are both progressives. And here are two progressive Democratic Congresspeople standing up and calling out the party for being disloyal to supporting Israel in a time of war.
So let me switch gears a little bit. One of the subjects of your keen engagement over the last half century has been the American Jewish community itself. as individuals and organizationally. You've got 10,000 people who are watching or will watch this within the next 36 hours or 48 hours. What would you like to see given these very different circumstances post October 7th, as Naomi mentioned? What would you like to urge individuals to do that they perhaps have done less of or have not done up until now?
You're talking about the Israel situation, you're talking about anti-Semitism.
Both.
Well, politically, I think I basically said it. I think voices have to be heard that, especially the Democrats, Jews and Jewish Democrats need to raise their voices and tell Washington how they feel about what's been happening in the last 3 months. I think it's very, very important. I think if they do, the message will be heard. On anti-Semitism, I'm going to go back a little bit. I think those of us in the field of professionally trying to stem anti-Semitism came to a realization a long time ago that anti-Semitism is a disease without an antidote, without a vaccine. And therefore, we will not eliminate it. There's nothing out there that will make it go away. And the best that we can do is find a strategy to contain it. And I think, to the credit of the American Jewish community in the last 50 years, maybe even more than 50 years, the ADLs and the American Jewish Committee and the American Jewish Congresses and all the institutions who have fought to contain, to make Jewish life in America different than anywhere else. I think we've succeeded. Succeeded to an extent which is almost unbelievable. But again, to the point where I think most American Jews began to believe and live in that bubble that we've eliminated it. All we did was contain it. And Jeff, just to illustrate it, in the last 100 years, from the lynching of Leo Frank to the murder of Jews in Pittsburgh, it was 100 years. In 100 years, only 3 Jews were killed in this country because they were Jews. Whereas in Europe and all over the world, millions were being killed in the last 100 years, from the pogroms in Kishinev to World War II, to the Middle East, etc. Jews were being killed because they were Jews. And in the US, 3. You had Yankel Rosenbaum, which was in the Crown Heights riots, and you had 2, Meir Kahane and a David Halberstam, a yeshiva student, both related to the Middle East. So I think from the perspective of history, the American Jewish community did well. We developed a containment strategy which used all the elements in our society to keep anti-Semitism in the sewers with the cover on. And it worked. We used truth, we used media, we used coalitions, we used the memory of the Holocaust, we used the threat of legal action, legislation. All these things together had an impact. And then 2 things happened. One is the advent of the internet. I wrote a book 10 years ago called Viral Hate, where I remember I was traveling to Palo Alto, meeting with the young geniuses, and I said to them, thank you for giving us this gift of interaction, information, education, but you've also given us an unintended consequence of a superhighway for hate. And so the one major element in terms of anti-Semitism, legitimizing it, making it popular, it basically is social media and the internet. The other element is we were a society of civility. We were a society, we weren't perfect. In fact, our history.
That may be Joe Biden.
What?
That may be Joe Biden.
Not yet. So we were a society of, not that we weren't racist and not that we were perfect, but we were civil. We respected, civility was very important. And truth, I learned and I taught all my life that the answer to what is anti-Semitism, it's the big lie. How do you answer the big lie? With the truth. And we used it as a tool. And then all of a sudden, what I would call Trumpism came about and destroyed civility. Trump destroyed all the taboos, and part of the taboos were anti-Semitism. He also destroyed truth. He also destroyed media. We use truth as a tool in fighting anti-Semitism. We use media. All these things are gone. So when you say to me, what do we need to do now? Is I think we need to come together and develop a new containment strategy. I don't know what it is, because we've lost many of the elements. So I'm not ready to say to the average citizen, American Jew, this is what you got to do. You got to raise your voice. There's no question about that. But we don't have at this moment a containment strategy, because we have to assess what are the elements out there that we can use in our favor. But at the end of the day, Jeff, at the end of the day, people, I was at a restaurant yesterday in New Jersey, and a gentleman came over to me and he says to me, you don't know me, I know who you are. I'm sorry to interrupt your dinner. Can I ask you a question? I said, sure. Are we going to be okay? and I embraced him. And I said, yes, we're going to be okay. And he says to me, well, okay, tell me how we're going to be okay. And I said, because the survival of the Jewish people, the survival against anti-Semitism is not about them. It's not about the enemies do. It's what we do as the Jewish people. And a while back in the ADL, I was invited to a conference at the White Plantation. And the subject was, will Jewish civilization survive the year 2050? And they did a study of the historians of history, Toynbee, Spengler, to see if they can distill how come Jewish civilization is still here and the Greeks and the Romans and the Incas have disappeared. And the conclusion that they came to is that there was a difference. And that's, when you ask me what it is that we need to do, I think it's in that secret of Jewish survival. After the Roman Empire, Jeff, collapsed, no Roman got up and said, I want to be a Roman. After the Greek civilization fell, no Greek got up there and said, hey, I want to be a Greek. We don't know about the Incas. There's nothing. We don't know, but they're not here. What's unique about the Jewish people was, after the destruction of the first temple and the exile and the second temple, they came back and they said they want to be Jews. They wrote the Talmud, they rebuilt the land, they rebuilt the temple, so that it didn't matter, what the enemies did. The Jews decided, we want to be Jews. And if after the Holocaust, if after the Shoah, Jews got up and said, we're going to build a Jewish state, I said to my father, why are you teaching me Jewish? And he explained to me who we are, what our values are, etc. So the answer to a long answer to a very short question, it all depends on us. It depends on how many Jews are going to put their mezuzahs on their walls, on their doors, rather than take them off. How many Jewish kids are going to continue wearing the kippah and the Star of David and embrace Israel rather than not? So it's up to us. And it's not a question just of pride. We need to be smart about it, but we need to understand that the future of Judaism, Jewish civilization, depends on us, and is not a function of our enemy.
Let me ask you a dicey question, one which I think a lot of American Jews are dealing with and not knowing the answer to these days, and that has to do with our historic, deep, natural, warm, productive, important partnerships with other communities of color, by way of example. We now have a situation in which, in the aftermath of October 7th, one might imagine that everybody, not just for 24 hours, not for just a week, but everybody would be lockstep in support of us, where we have lost 1,200 massacred, thousands mutilated, a couple of hundred kidnapped. And yet we have not seen that everywhere. And that raises the question for people, what do we do about these alliances that have meant so much to us? And I know you've worked your entire life on them. Do we reassess our position? Do we communicate something to these communities? Do we go on with business as usual? How should we approach this breach that, let's face it, has now existed in certain places with some of our partners.
Yeah, but I was guided in my role at the ADL with Hillel's teachings. If I'm not for myself, who will be? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? And that's part of Jewish values, Jewish tradition. The Torah teaches us, tzedek, tzedek tirdof, you shall pursue justice. And I think we did it both altruistically and selfishly. We understood that if we raise the level of respect and tolerance in our society for everybody, it will also raise the level of respect. So I don't think, and so what happened, I wasn't shocked at the silence. Because I didn't do it. That means I didn't build the relationships. I didn't stand up when I thought it was right, because I believed that when there'll be a time, they'll come and help us. I didn't. Listen, I'm a survivor of the Holocaust who survived because one woman risked her life to save me. What I learned about the Holocaust was that whenever good people stood up, Jews lived, gays lived, gypsies lived. So I know that people, but I also was a realist to understand that there were a tiny, tiny, tiny minority of people who did it. So I think Jews need to embrace, what's right and what's decent and other communities, because it's the right thing to do. Not because we think that they're going to be there. And therefore the lesson is, first and foremost, you need to care for yourselves. Then you'll care for others. But when you care and worry about yourselves, it's not in a belief that they're going to come. Because you're right. I don't think we can count on the fingers of our fingers on both hands, 10 institutions who have stood up. There were some who stood up the first week and then disappeared. So no, I think the lesson is, that's number one. Number one is we have to worry about our safety, our security, about well-being, and then worry about others. But not because we believe they're going to be there for us, because it's the just and the right thing to do. Because if the level of civility in our society is higher, then the level of respect and role of the Jews is also higher.
Let me turn to some of the dozens of questions that have been asked by participants, only a small percentage of which obviously will we be able to reach. Some of the questions have to do with campuses. You alluded to it. What are the strategies now in this new reality that American Jews as individuals or as organizationally ought to employ to protect Jewish kids who are in a state of, DEFCON 1 on some of these campuses?
Right. So first, I think we need to also remember it's always been bad on campus. I remember being on the campus in the 60s, and there was no picnic being a Zionist, pro-Israel. There was steak and core and the Arab students, et cetera, and it was the same 25 universities. And the issues of anti-Israel have always been there, spilling over into anti-Jewish. I just found papers 30 years ago. I went to visit the president of Columbia complaining that they were not protecting the safety of Jewish students. So it's not a new situation, but listen, there were always swastikas in Emory that I remember, but nobody knew about it. Today it's on the internet, so everybody knows about it, and you see it more dramatically. The issue, again, here is it's not a question of freedom of speech. It's a question of behavior. And nobody's challenging students from saying whatever they want. That's what the campus is all about. But I think the administrations have been intimidated, have given up their ability to protect the campus. I want to say not just the Jewish students, There are codes. Every school has behavior codes, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. You can say what you want, but you can't do what you want. You can't intimidate other students. You cannot stop the operations of the school, closing places, closing classes. So it's very clear. You don't have to create a new science of how do you deal with it. It's all there. What they need to do is act, and have not been acting. They need to apply the code. They need to suspend. They need to arrest. And again, I believe they're starting to do it now. They're starting to do it now because, the Jewish community is suing. The United States government is investigating. So all of a sudden, there's a price to be paid. And I think what we witnessed with the three presidents of the universities was a very important lesson. There need to be consequences. So we've seen there are consequences, even to the presidents of top university. There are consequences because they're not getting as much money from the Jewish community. There are consequences because now Jewish parents are deciding where is it safe. And all of a sudden, I know the ADL and Hillel and others are developing criteria to tell the Jewish community where it is safe for Jewish kids to be. Which administrations have been acting in a proactive or even not proactive, a post-active way to protect the student. This will make a difference. If there are consequences, needs to be consequences from the outside for the administrations of these universities to understand that there need to be consequences on the inside. That is happening. That is happening every single day. You're hearing of lawsuits, you're hearing of investigations, and you're starting to hear universities beginning to use their code of behavior. And I believe, I remember one university president was asked, well, why don't you suspend them? They said, well, because they're on student visas and they'll be sent home. And my answer is, so all you need to do is suspend one, send one home, and I guarantee you the situation will change dramatically. So I think what the community is doing, which is to make sure there are consequences, to make sure that they select schools where their administrations are acting positively. And I think we are beginning to see change, and we'll see more change in the months ahead.
Now, let me ask you about the other side of the coin. You've talked about disruptions, intimidation, harassment, and safety, properly so. What about the state of animus and ignorance that exists among American kids, including, may I say, Jewish kids? I've told people that I sometimes wonder if students these days know the difference between the Gaza Strip and the Louisiana Purchase, and I wonder about it. You can deal with the disruptions and the threats and the intimidation, but how does one deal? What's the strategy for dealing with the attitudes and the lack of information and the eagerness to presume the worst about Israel and about Jews that seems to exist on some of these campuses?
Well, we have two problems. One problem is the past. I mean, our educational system is such that we stop educating, Civil War, after the Civil War. We don't teach about World War II. We never get to it. We don't teach geography. So part of the problem is our educational system in general. We don't teach civility. We don't teach civil behavior. We don't teach civil, how to be a citizen. We no longer do that for all kinds of political reasons. We're banning books in school. So part of it is a much bigger problem. The other one is the Jewish problem, and that is we've missed teaching one or two generations of Jewish kids what it means to be Jewish. We've taught them, great schools, great theories, classics, etc., but didn't teach us the Jewish classics, what Jewish values are, what it means to be a Jew. And you have a new element of education. The new element of education is the internet. The new element of education is social media. And so that's where people learn their news, their facts, their history, and there's misinformation and disinformation and lies, etc. So it's a huge problem. Listen, I remember after 9/11, our society struggled with safety and security, how to protect lives. And we, as a society, struggled with the balance between life and civil liberties. And we made a compromise. It was called the Patriot Act. And most people don't even know what happened. I'm not sure, understand. But we gave up some of our freedoms. We used to get on a plane, chaplap, nothing. We used to go into buildings, into government buildings, without being checked, without being photographed, we gave that up. We basically decided that life is more precious than 100% civil liberties in order to live. So we made a compromise. We're in another situation now where we need to find a balance between the First Amendment and civility, because the First Amendment unfettered is like yelling fire in a theater. And we don't have, Congress is dysfunctional. We can't leave it to the companies because they have a profit motive to decide what is on or not. I remember I went to Palo Alto and 20 years ago, and they said to me algorithms, and I, like a dummy, said okay, but now I know they control algorithms, so they can make a difference. We have to come together and find this balance between civility and freedom of speech. Otherwise, the ignorance, the lies, the disinformation, it's impacting not only on ignorance that leads to hate and fuels and feeds anti-Semitism and hatred, but it's destroying our democratic system. It's impacting on elections. It's impacting on what we know about people. So we have a challenge. It's beyond the Jewish community, but it will impact a great deal on the Jewish community if we develop this compromise of a balance between, again, I said, First Amendment freedoms and civility.
Let me ask a question which I've received about the not necessarily entirely altruistic investments, quote unquote, in American higher education by some Middle Eastern actors. It's been reported widely, for example, that Qatar, which has all of 315,000 citizens, has donated $6 billion over the last 15, 18 years to American institutions, including the one that I teach at Brown University. And it's not because they're interested in promoting liberal education. They expect to get payoff, and there's some reason to think they get payoff. It isn't just Qatar, it's Saudi Arabia, it's some other countries. This seems to be, as the questioner points out, something which flies below the radar screen, and yet it's awfully important for a lot of reasons, including what it's doing to American education and American democracy. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, the truth is, it was above the radar screen many years ago. When the price of oil doubled, the Arabs found themselves with a windfall of money, and they decided to invest in America. I remember living with a period where it was the buying of America. Everybody was buying America. We worried about the Japanese buying America, the Chinese buying, but the Arabs had the money, and they invested in universities. They developed and set up 30, 40 years ago, Middle East centers, and they conditioned them. They conditioned a Middle East center, Judenrein, not or Israel Rhine, without Israel. So that many of these universities who took millions of dollars to set up, and they funded grants and scholarships and students and professors on condition that they teach the Middle East without Israel. Some universities set up Israel programs, mostly did not. The Jewish community, on the other hand, I met with one of the major philanthropists recently, and I said to him, tell me, you gave this university $20 million. When $20 million was a lot of money. Did you ask them for anything? Did you ask them that there be a course on Jewish history or the Holocaust or Israel? And the answer was no. He said, the only thing I asked for is my name on the wall. So we did not condition. I also remember, Jeff, in those days, some universities came to us, to the ADL, and asked us to help them develop non-discriminatory clauses in the agreements. And some universities did well, but others didn't care. We are now paying the price of 2 generations of scholars. You have to ask yourself, have teachers, professors in these universities applaud the murder of Israeli men, women, and children? Where's that come from? You don't have to be politically one, but they were bought and paid for, and now it's 2 generations. So you have professors who have been. I had a classmate in Yeshiva Flatbush who was a Middle East expert, and in the '60s he decided he's not going to be a Middle East expert. He says, I can't get a decent job in any university because I'm an heavy Israel Middle East expert. So we are now reaping that. So yeah, it wasn't under the wire because we knew at that time it was challenge, but money bought. And so now we have to take a look to what, Texas A&M, I just read recently, is closing its campus in Qatar. You know how deep it went? There was a school in the Bronx, a public school in the Bronx that had a map of the Middle East without Israel. And somebody went to investigate why, because it's funded by some Qatar foundation. So it reaches down into the elementary schools in the Bronx.
Let me ask a little bit. You alluded before to the fact that there's plenty of problems on both sides of the aisle, depending on where you look. And over the last several days, Tucker Carlson has been all over the media making what seem like, off the wall charges about Israel. Do talk a little bit about the threat from the far right, since we've talked about the far left.
Well, the far right has been anti-Semitic, so that's a concern. But I'm concerned politically that what's happening is that the Republican Party under Trump is becoming isolationist. And isolationism is very serious to the relationship that the United States has with Israel. So you don't have to be pro-Arab, you don't have to be pro-Palestinian at the expense of being anti-Israel. But if you're an isolationist, and that's what we're seeing, that's what Trump introduced, then there's no foreign relations. That means you don't invest in other countries, you don't help them. Look what's happening on the debate on the Ukraine. There's no question that Ukraine is fighting for democracy, is fighting for us. That if Ukraine wasn't there, we'd be at war. And yet, look, the hesitancy is the Republicans used to understand it, and now they're holding up not only aid for Israel, excuse me, but aid for Ukraine, because they have other priorities. Now, the border is a priority, immigration is a priority, but not at the expense of America's role in the world. So yeah, there is a serious concern. And in the progressive left of the Democratic Party, we have what I would call, and we're coming to Pesach, Vayakam, they came a new Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. So in the Democratic Party, we have young Democrats who don't know Jewish history, don't know the role of what Jews did for this country, what they did for, in terms of social issues and social values and the fighting against it. They don't know, and they don't care. They don't know about the Holocaust. They don't. And on the other side, on the Republican side, you have isolationists. And that future, and ignorance. And that's very, very troubling and dangerous in terms of the future.
And I want to ask you about Ukraine. Because you are somebody who over the course of your career has been very personally engaged in trying to reinforce and advance democracy outside of our borders. Talk a little bit about why it is so important, why it's fundamental to the defense of democracy. When you run into people who say, why does this involve us? Why should we be spending this money and the rest of it? Talk about that.
Defending and standing up for Ukraine for a Jew is probably one of the most difficult things that can be. The Ukrainians were terrible. Not only in the pogroms, but most of the guards in Eastern Europe were volunteer Ukrainians. A lot of the killings were done by. So it's very difficult because the pain in terms of our relationship with Ukrainian history is terrible. One of the great heroes, Chmelnytsky, was a pogrom, killed thousands of Jews, and yet I think the Jewish community has stood up to embrace Ukraine. And I remember saying recently in an interview, I feel Ukrainian because they're fighting for our freedom. They're fighting Russia. They're fighting totalitarianism. They're fighting for freedom. And they're fighting for our freedom because if they weren't fighting it, if they weren't doing it, we would be sending our troops, our own boys, to fight, because this is the beginning of a third world war. But again, the politics here are such, and the Republicans, I think most of them understand it. Most of them are anti-communist, are anti-Putin, and yet the politics are so bizarre, so bizarre. Even look what was happening. There was almost a deal on the border between Democrats and Republicans. And Biden, to his credit, was ready to accept things that he would normally never accept. But he understood the crisis. He understood the need. He was hoping to, be able to come together. And yet, what did Trump do? Pulled the rug under it so that Biden doesn't have a success. It's not Biden's success. It's America's success. And so, the politics in this country are so bizarre. They're cultist. We're not talking about values. We're not talking about real interests. We're talking about gotcha and getcha. About vindictiveness, and that's scary. And Israel is suffering from that, because I think if you poll Republicans, very easy. They're using Israel politically as well, and they all come out. Look at all the resolutions. Muntik and Donnerstick, there's a resolution brought in by the Republicans in Congress supporting and loving Israel. Well, forget about that. Stand up and vote arms and economic aid, which is what Israel desperately needs. And yet the politics are so crazy that they're not willing to do it. So we have issues on both sides.
Abe, I'm going to turn it over back to Naomi, but not before expressing the gratitude of all of us on today, watching in various platforms, those who will be watching over the next couple of days. It's an honor to have you full stop on this program, and we're very grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you, Abe, so much. It was so wonderful to have you here, albeit for a very challenging and difficult topic. I was monitoring the chat and the Q&A section the entire time, and we've had dozens, I think, questions, comments, a lot of support of you and your decades of important work at ADL, and now the work that you're doing post ADL in this important fight. So and they're continuing to come in, the accolades for you. So thank you. And thank you, Jeff, as always, for your amazing work as a moderator. I want to thank all of our listeners as well for tuning in. And of course, to Saul Ewing, our wonderful partner in this series, and also to our co-sponsors, Rabbi Arthur Weiner and the JCC of Paramus Congregation, Beth Tikva in New Jersey. As always, I apologize for any questions that we weren't able to get to. There was just too many. But if you'd like, you can email us later at info@asuh.org, and we can do our best to communicate offline after the webinar ends. We will, as always, share a recording of this webinar via email in the coming days. It'll be available on our website and on our YouTube page, as well as on Facebook. And feel free to rewatch or to share it with others who missed it today. Again, for those of you who are looking to give back to University of Haifa during this urgent time and to support our student soldiers who have been serving and defending the country, you can do so at asuh.org/donate. That information is now on the screen. As you know, the supporters of the University of Haifa are our most critical partners, especially during this difficult time for our community and for the entire state of Israel. If you're not already, please sign up for our newsletter on our website to find out about the latest news coming out of ASUH and the university, as well as to receive our newsletters. Please also follow us across all social media, where we're very active. And I also want to make a plug for the University of Haifa's Board of Governors meeting, which will take place June 2nd and 3rd at the university in person. We will also be having a post-BOG mission June 4 through 6 throughout the country. We'll be seeing some very important sites in the north and the south and the center, and we'd love to have you join us. Again, you can email me or info@asuh.org to learn more. Thank you again, Abe and Jeff, for your time. And we continue to have our thoughts and prayers and best wishes to our students and faculty and everyone at the university. And we will see you soon for our next webinar. You'll hear about that soon in your inbox. Thanks again. Take care.